At Passive Workforce, we help healthcare entrepreneurs start, grow, and sell their businesses. While consulting, I've noticed there is a debate as to should your employees be 1099 or W-2. In today's video, I'll be discussing the difference between the two, how it will affect your company, and which structure I think is best. Let's get into it. To start off, let's define each category. 1099s and W-2s are tax forms. A 1099 miscellaneous is used to report payments made to independent contractors who cover their own employment taxes. A W-2 form, on the other hand, is used for employees whose employers withhold payroll taxes for their earnings. When you hire an employee as a 1099 contractor, what happens is that you're paying them directly. You're paying them a fixed rate. So let's just say if you're paying them $30 an hour and they worked 40 hours for the week, you would be paying them $1,200 for that week. You won't be taking into consideration any of the tax withholdings that you're supposed to take into consideration. And since they're considered an independent contractor, no different than a construction contractor, you are not responsible for their workers' compensation insurance. On the other hand, if you elect to hire people as traditional employees, where they're going to receive a W-2 tax form at the end of the year, they're going to fill out what's called a W-4 form, which is the form that you're probably familiar with because you've had a job in the past, where you actually indicate what your withholdings are going to be. In this particular situation, your payroll company is going to withhold taxes for the employee. And what most people don't know when they're first getting into this business is that the employer themselves also have to match a percentage of the taxes that the employee is contributing, raising your overall basis. So if we use the same example of $30 an hour as a W-2 employee, you as the employer is going to have to pay the $30 times 40 hours plus your contributions and taxes and workers' comp because they're going to be considered an employee. In the healthcare staffing and home healthcare space, we're talking about an additional 20% in cost because you have to cover Medicare, FIDA, FUTA, unemployment taxes, state taxes depending on your state, as well as your workers' compensation rate. And that's why a lot of the agencies, when they're getting started out, they see the cost difference and they choose a 1099 structure because in their minds, all of these people are contracted employees and it's an easy way to try to skirt the mandates for your employer taxes. The main difference between the two is how they are considered from a taxation and workforce classification perspective. So when the pandemic took hold, the government's idea to keep people employed and keep people earning an income was to roll out what was called the PPP loan program. That was the payroll protection program. And what they did was take about 8 weeks worth of payroll and actually gave a forgivable loan to employers. For my company, that was a few $1 million worth of payroll. And if I was a 1099 company, I wouldn't be eligible because 1099 contractors aren't considered employees. So you have all these healthcare agencies and home care agencies that were employing people as 1099 contractors that missed out on millions of dollars of forgivable debt because they weren't contributing to the system. And if you think about it from the government's point of view, when you have a W-2 employee, you're paying payroll taxes, you're paying federal taxes, you're paying into the Medicare system, you're paying into the unemployment system. So if you haven't been contributing over the years and your employees aren't contributing overall from a taxation standpoint, you're actually doing the government a disservice. So to penalize those types of companies, the government didn't make that payroll protection program an option for contractors. At first, it sounds appealing that for the 1099 audience, you don't have to consider taxes, workers' comp, or labor law mandates because it's going to bring your cost of labor down. What you're missing is that it's dangerous and oftentimes illegal. To put it to perspective, I'll share 3 stories. The first is a recent one that will speak volumes: PPP loans and 1099 agencies. Over the past 2 years, I've been participating in the acquisitions and sales of different home care companies and healthcare staffing companies. And one thing that I came across in trying to purchase companies is that companies with a 1099 structure are pretty much a poison pill. And they're a poison pill for a few different reasons. Historically, people who choose the 1099 structure are trying to avoid overtime and payroll taxes as well as workers' comp. But if you think about healthcare in general, a lot of the employees are sometimes kind of on the more junior side of education. Home health aides, nurse aides, they're only taking training programs to get started, and they really aren't that sophisticated from a mental standpoint. Then you have the nurses and the physicians who are also potentially working as contractors, but the way that the government perceives them is that they're a little more sophisticated and can work with CPAs and accountants to help them navigate their tax issues. But for the basic employee, what ends up happening is that they run into tax issues because they are taxed at the self-employed tax rate, which is a much higher tax rate than the W-2 tax rate. And if that's not managed properly, they could end up with a pretty heavy tax bill. And then that creates trouble for you, the 1099 shop. Why was this particular employee labeled as an independent contractor when everything about their employment is more or less a employer-employee relationship? If you're enjoying this video and learning something, do me a favor and like this video. Also, if you want to be up to date with the latest in our industry, make sure you subscribe to the channel and share this video with your colleagues. I really appreciate it. The second story I want to share relates to companies that the owners were ready to sell and how their 1099 model hurt them in the sales process. For example, there was one company that we were looking at where they were providing a lot of live-in services, meaning that the home health aide lived one-on-one with the patient. And that person was there for 7 days a week, getting paid a fixed rate. Now, from the overtime laws, which I have some experience with because I kind of ran into this issue myself, but the overtime laws mandate that each live-in worker get paid a 13-hour workday. And if they're working 7 days a week, that's 91 hours for that work week. If you're not paying them regular wages for the first 40 hours and overtime wages for the next 51, you are actually violating the laws associated with live-in workers. And that employee, at any point, if they decide to sue you, could claim back up to 7 years of overtime pay. So if I'm looking to buy a company that has that level of exposure, one or two things is going to happen. I'm either going to completely just say, I'm not dealing with this can of worms. I don't want to get into this sort of business, or I'm going to have to discount or hold an escrow from the purchase price the amount of risk involved in potential for that sort of labor dispute. The same goes hand in hand with workers' compensation. Imagine one of those workers got injured on the job, and since they're an independent contractor who's not carrying workers' compensation insurance, they now have a bad back, they can't go to work. Who do you think they're going to sue? They're going to sue you. And when they decide to sue you as the new owner of that business, they're going to not only look at that employee's record, but they're going to look at any other employee who had that 1099 designation, and they're going to say, you've been skirting workers' compensation contributions for 7 years, and they're going to hit you with a big fat bill. So if you are building an agency, and at some point you're thinking about selling, taking a 1099 structure is going to pretty much eliminate all possibilities of any sophisticated private equity firm or public company taking interest in your company. The last story is a personal one, referring to a labor dispute that I had. I was involved in our first and only class action lawsuit related to overtime. The firm that we secured, of course, had war stories to share, as well as awesome guidance regarding overlooked labor laws and common bad practices by companies in our industry group. Our lawsuit was quite a stupid one because we were following the laws governing live-in workers. But what we decided to do was that we decided to give a bonus hour to every live-in worker. So instead of paying them 13 hours a day, we paid them 14 to make it a little more attractive for them to work those cases. And because of that, we weren't giving them that 14th hour, that free hour, at the overtime rate. We will only give it at their base rate. Some attorney reached out to my staff, brought this up, and they decided to sue me for that 1 hour of overtime across all my live-in workers because we were paying it at a regular rate. Once we secured our attorney and our attorney reviewed our documentation, they said, yes, we had a legitimate claim to fight this legally, but what would happen is anything that we did wrong would actually be brought into question and would open us up to a larger can of worms by going to trial with it. And anything that goes to trial gets like a triple penalty. So one of the things that he found in our files was that we were using a internally generated wage disclosure form saying, this is the wage that you're being hired at, this is what you agreed to. And in the state of New York, that actually has to be on an official New York Department of Labor document. And the penalty for each infraction is $3,000. So he said, well, even if they found you not guilty of this 14-hour no overtime situation, they're definitely going to find you guilty on not using the New York State form, and that's going to be $3,000 for every employee times 3 because you brought it to trial. So it's like there's no point in fighting this. He then told us other stories about companies who got brought into the same sort of lawsuit, and since they were 1099 and they had 51 hours a week for years on these sort of employees, they had to back pay all of that money at the overtime rate, which obviously will bankrupt any home care agency or healthcare staffing company that has to pay 51 hours of OT for years across all employees who join that group. So again, here are real world examples as to why going with one structure versus the other is actually more dangerous to you than it is beneficial. If you're thinking about it from just a monetary standpoint, of course, you're going to try to find ways to justify why 1099 is going to work for you. You might even find an attorney who agrees, but any attorney who's worth their salt that's working in employment law is going to tell you absolutely stay away from 1099 structures. They're nothing but a disaster. So where does that leave us? My position is to avoid 1099 as an employment structure at all costs. If you're starting a home care or a staffing agency, it doesn't matter if your competitors are 1099, it will ultimately land you in hot water and hurt your company's valuation or potential to sell. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember, our team is always on standby, ready to help you start, grow, and sell your healthcare company. Until the next one, take care.